Hello, and in this video we're going to have a look at a network chat program. I'm not going to do a complete walkthrough of all the programming like the previous videos, but I figured it would be quite useful to have a look at this program, see how things are done, and have a look at the different things done in a full program. So first of all, let's have a look. So I'm running 3 different instances of this program. It's all the same program, and I've got a radio button up here that switches between server and client. If it's a client, it's got options to configure the IP address and port. If it's server, you're just running the server. So I'm just going to run that, and that's started and waiting for connections. And on the clients, I'm going to connect, and it says, oh, it's received a connection. It's happy. That one's connected. Yep, it's got more, got another connection coming in. Now we can send a message out, and it goes to all the clients. And you can see that wherever I type, it goes to all the clients. Okay, so that's all working nicely. Now let's have a look at the actual program. So I've got a list of all the open sockets. So as soon as I create a connection, be it the server creating a connection or the clients creating a connection to the server, then it adds it to this. So the server may, in this example, had 2 sockets in here. The clients had 1, which was the server. And the live threads is just a list of all the threads which are running, and that just means that at the end of the program we can just make sure they're all tidied up. Okay, so it's just creating a Tkinter interface, and I'll just call this up at the same time. And there's nothing too fancy on here. If you've done any Tkinter stuff, then it should be fairly familiar. There's a frame for the connection section, which is all of that, and there's a frame for the chat section. Description box up here. There's a boolean here. So the boolean is used on the radio button. So you can see that a radio button takes the parent frame, so the connection section, the text, so what name should go next to the radio button, a variable, which in this case is server mode, which is a boolean, the value, whether it's true or false. So we're starting that is true apparently, and what gets changed when, what gets run when you change the options. So as soon as I change this, this function gets changed, gets called. And then just putting that into a grid. And then I'm creating another frame here which starts off empty, and then whenever you change it, everything inside it gets destroyed and it regenerates it based on what option you've set. So this section is its own frame, and then it just says change mode, says okay, what's selected, and then it will populate it accordingly. The chat section is a text box and an entry box and a button. You'll notice it's disabled. That means that the user can't type into that. They can only type into there, which then goes up to that. It does mean that when you want to change it programmatically, you have to change the state and then change the state back, but we'll have a look at that in a sec. Okay, so the change mode just looks at the server mode, and it sets up the server buttons or the client buttons as appropriate. Okay, let's have a look at the connect button first of all. So on the server, run. There we go. So when you run the server, you're running the command run server, and that is this function. All this function does is it fires off the server in a thread, and it adds that thread into the live thread so we can track it later. So that server thread which should be around here somewhere. There we go. Okay, so what it does first of all is it says, yep, I'm connected, and that's going to be the basis of a while loop. Then it sets up the connection. It does a timeout, so that timeout will mean that it won't wait forever for incoming connections. It will wait 2 seconds, and then it'll go around the loop again, which allows the loop to exit. But it does all of the network setup, which we've talked about in our previous network video. And then it starts a while loop with self.connected. This means that anywhere in my program, I can change self.connected to false, and this loop should naturally end. So it's a way of closing the thread from outside of the thread without just telling it to die. Because if you just randomly kill it, it could be anywhere in the execution and could potentially cause issues. But having a nice loop with something outside of the thread which can be accessed is a good way of handling it. So it tries to do an accept. Bear in mind with the timeout, this may fail. If it does, then we don't want to do this, and we just want to carry on looping around unless we said that we're not connected anymore. If it is a valid connection, then what it's doing is it's starting off a client thread, and that's just received messages from that socket. And that socket is being added to all the open sockets. So, self.receive messages is this. So this is being started off in a thread, and we're using the same self.connected, and all it's doing is saying, oh, are there any messages? If there is, run the received messages. Otherwise, just carry on waiting for more messages. It does have a section here so that when a client sends a message to the server, it doesn't show it itself. It waits for the server to say, yep, I got that message, and then it sends it out to all the clients. I figured that was a reasonable way to have it so that all the clients get it, and the one client that sent it doesn't get it twice. If you just get it to put it automatically in the chat window, then when it gets to the server's going to send it to all the other clients. So it's got to have some way not to send it to the one which just sent it, which gets messy. I found that it was a lot easier just to say, okay, the server controls the message. So the received message is fairly simple in that it just unlocks the chat window, inserts the message, then locks the chat window again. Nice and simple. Okay, that is the connect button for the server. The connect button for the client is very similar in that it just runs self.connect. So let's have a look at self.connect. Again, we've got very similar code, but we're connecting to a specific IP address and port. And then we're launching a thread, again, the receive message one, which is exactly the same. So the receive message handling is pretty much the same across the client and the server. And then it adds the socket to the list of sockets. That means that if we look at when we send a message, all it does is it takes the message, or if you haven't provided it with a message, it looks at the message box. And then it will go through all of the sockets which are listed, which are connected to, and it will launch a send thread on each of those. I did that as a thread. It doesn't have to, but I did that as the thread because if there was issues sending it to one client, then it would try to send it to that. I didn't want it to hang, wait around for whatever issues before it went on to the next one and the flow continued. So I'm just sending off, yes, send it to that one, sort it out, send it to that one, sort it out, and then I can carry on with what it's doing. So it just launches off a few threads. These shouldn't survive for that long. And then it just clears the message box. I do have a simple log method. All that does is it prints it to the console for debugging, and then it adds it into the log up there as opposed to the chat window. Because of the way that we're doing the loops on the threads, the disconnect button, all it needs to do is set the self.connected to false, but then we want to try and close all the sockets, and we want to join all of the threads, and this just is basically hang the program until each of the threads is actually closed, which shouldn't be that long, but if it is, something's going wrong, and yeah, it may need to be killed. So that is the majority of the code here. It's an awkward one to get running, but the concepts in it are fairly simple in that you're just launching a separate thread for each thing. It's one of those programs which you can get a basic version working fairly quickly, but to iron out all the bugs takes a lot longer. If we just look at the actual flow, when the program runs, it just calls main, which creates a new net chat and runs it, and all that does is it calls the main loop. Once the main loop is over, it will just make sure that it terminates, disconnects the server and tidies things off. So that's the entire program. Feel free to have a go at it, see if you can make one yourself. It's not as scary as it seems. 229 lines, but a lot of that. So if we look from the beginning, all of, even more actually, all of that, 75 lines, is just Tkinter stuff, which you should be fairly familiar with anyway. Okay, give it a go, see how you get on. Best of luck.